Wonderful. Well, thank you, Haley. Tonight, we're going to have the City of Gladstone's budget workshop. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackie Betts, and I'm the city administrator. And it is budget season. And this year, we have many new budget committee members, new city council members. And tonight, what we've planned for you is to give you an overview of what the role of a budget committee member is. We are very fortunate to have Kathy Brucker, who's the city's finance consultant, to take us through this process. Wanted to let everybody know that this is being recorded, and the members that aren't available to watch it this evening will have access to it as soon as we put it onto the city's website. We want you to be prepared and educated before we meet in May for our first budget committee meeting. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kathy to start our presentation.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. What we wanted to go through tonight was what our budget process is, basically from start to finish. It is a long process, there is no doubt. We will also be having this PowerPoint available so that if anybody would like to refer to it at a later time, or if you have any follow-up questions whatsoever. So to get started, on the next slide, please. What is local budget law and what is a budget? It's a financial plan for the city. Excuse me, I got one slide ahead of myself there. Local budget law was established originally under ORS Chapter 24. It's standardized statewide for almost all entities, with a difference resulting from size, purpose, and complexity of local governments. It explains the entity and fiscal policies that frames the budget, strongly encourages citizen participation throughout the entire process, and based on estimates of resources and expenditures that must balance overall to each other. It also ensures control of spending as adopted by the governing board, and ORS Chapter 294.316 lists the excluded entities from Oregon budget. I believe one of them on there is a cemetery district, but there really are not that many entities that don't have to go through this. Next slide, please. So what is a budget? It's a financial plan for the city. It covers our biennium period. A biennium budget will run from July 1, 2023 through June 30th, 2025. The fiscal period is 1 year, so our budget obviously will contain 2 fiscal periods. Each fiscal year, 23-24 and 24-25, will have annual financial reports completed and audits conducted after the close of each year based on actual data. It is based on estimated revenues and expenditures, with lawful appropriations defined to assure the public that the funds are spent prudently. Next slide, please. So tonight we'll review the 4-phase process involved. The first one, the budget committee will review the proposed budget as presented by staff and take public comment. Then the budget committee will approve recommendation of the budget for later adoption by the city council. Following that, the city council will adopt the budget, again with public comment, before the end of the current fiscal year, June 30th, 2023. During the budget period, any changes are tightly controlled by local budget law as to the method used and the amounts allowed. Next slide. It all starts with the budget calendar approved by the city council, usually in February. This lays out the meeting dates, publication dates, and necessary filings with the county assessor to levy our property taxes. This same calendar applies to the Urban Renewal Agency budget, which is published separately from the city.
And Kathy, I did want to make a note that the budget calendar that the city council previously approved had an error in the date. We had you scheduled of coming in on Memorial Day. That was our error, so that the budget calendar that you see here and the budget calendar that we will be sending out with the agenda is correct.
Yes, I do apologize. The budget calendar that we're showing here, Jackie, is May 29th, 2023, and that is the one that was moved to for the second meeting, May 30th, if necessary. So what they're receiving in the proposed budget, yes, will be absolutely correct.
Okay.
We sent the May 30th revision to them with this agenda. Yes, but
I'm not sure we would have had anybody show up on Memorial Day.
I would hope not. Thank you. So for the next slide, please. Phase 1, the proposed budget. It's prepared and presented by fund. Every local government operates under fund accounting. Each fund is its own independent, self-balancing, standalone entity, never more evident than during the budget process. Each fund must be budgeted and balanced. Resources always equals appropriations. All estimates must be based on the best known information at the time, developed internally based on previous data or external input, such as state revenue sharing estimates. Next slide. The fund types. These are established for specific activities or purposes. These are the city's fund types. We have general fund, we have a special revenue funds, URA being considered a special revenue fund, but again, issued separately. The road and street fund. Our other two special revenues are the police and communication levy fund and the fire and emergency services levy fund. We have debt service funds, classification of, but currently the city does not have any general obligation debt. So we do not have any that we're currently budgeting for. Next slide, please. Then following more fund types, we have capital projects funds. We recently just closed the civic buildings capital fund. We have no other capital projects funds open at this point in time. We have enterprise funds for sewer, water, and the stormwater fund. And then we have an agency fund, which is our municipal court fund. They're all accounted for a little differently with the annual financial statements, but all are budgeted in the same method. Estimated resources minus estimated appropriations equals 0. Any excess funds are held within the contingency appropriations. Next slide, please. For the standardized format, this is what we prepare roughly in November, December, and send this out to the departments for each one of them to start developing their current year estimates and then future year resources and appropriations. Next slide. And then how to prepare your budget. They follow the following guidelines for this. They project beginning balance for each fund. That is something basically I take care of internally here. Project revenues from each fund. I take care of those. We rely heavily on the department managers to help with projecting expenditures for each fund, any transfers to and from. And then the projected ending fund balance I take care of as of the end of the current fiscal year, which provides us our beginning fund balance to start off the budget with. Next slide. Again, with beginning fund balance, these are calculated by the current year estimates of revenue and expense to arrive at the beginning fund balance, estimating this about 7 months before the end of the current year. So it is a rather, I won't say it's a WAG number. It's very much an educated guess, but it is still an estimate. for biennium budgeting, the equation will span both years consecutively. Next slide. The revenues are projected based on analytics, historical trending, or external information received, such as the assessed value for property tax calculation. The city's main sources of revenue are divided into these categories: property and local taxes, franchise fees, interest, grants, charges for services, state taxes, the court fines and forfeitures, and miscellaneous. Next slide. The types of taxes that we have: property taxes are based on the city's permanent rate of $4.8174 per thousand of assessed value. Local option taxes were voted in for the police levy at 68 cents per thousand and the fire levy at 31 cents per thousand. The GO bonds voted on by the Gladstone community for a specific purpose. If we had any, that's how those would be arrived at, but the city has none at this time. We have transient lodging taxes that are also considered a local tax, and that is 6% on hotels, motels, and other short-term rentals for stays less than 30 days. Next slide. On our property taxes, the county assessor will annually verify the tax rates and levies submitted by each local taxing district. This verified levy provides the starting point for the following budget cycle. Next slide. Estimating taxes. Measure 50 limits the assessed value to a 3% increase per year on existing unchanged properties. Addition to 3% increase can come from new construction and boundary growth. And this is the only way taxes may increase based on growth of assessed value. The permanent rate does not change. Other rates may change based on voter approval as far as levies and GO bonds, but the permanent rate never does. And then the city assumes a 95% collection rate as determined from what Clackamas County historically pulls in total each tax year. Next slide. Measure 5 limit. If the Measure 5 limit is exceeded, the city would have to reduce tax collection due to compression. And that Measure 5 calculation is limited to $5 per thousand for education and $10 per thousand for general government based on the real market value. So fortunately, the city's loss from compression has been absolutely minimal over the past few years and is forecasted at 0 for the 2023 tax year. Next slide. Budget requirements. All department expenditures are categorized into these object classifications: personnel-related costs, operating costs, infrastructure, vehicles and equipment, and repayment of debt. Then further, we have transfers out, payments to other funds for services, and operating contingencies such as, for example, a rainy day fund for unforeseen needs. Some cities will budget the unreserved ending fund balance and reserve for future expenses. These are funds that are set aside for use in future budget cycles. Like revenues, expenditures are projected based on analytics, historical trending, or external information received. Next slide. Oh. So the other thing that is very important on here is the publishing the notices of the budget committee meetings. Publication includes printing in newspapers of general circulation or mailing first class, hand delivery, or printing in newspapers and posting on websites. So you can see there are various methods of publication allowed, and it is a very important step, the start of the public notification process. It advertises where, when, and if public comment is allowed at that particular meeting. We publish not less than 5 days nor more than 30 days prior to the meeting date. Next slide. Phase 2 of the Budget Committee consists of the governing body plus an equal number of appointed electors. We have a 7-member council, so we have 7 additional Budget Committee members added for a total of the 14. Appointed members cannot be employees, agents, or officers of the city. They serve for staggered 4-year terms, and all members have same authority on the Budget Committee. If the committee is unable to fill all appointed electors, it may operate on less members with a proportionate adjustment to the majority count. Next slide. For the Budget Committee duties, the most important slide explaining what you are here for. And the next slides will cover the steps themselves, but this is telling us as far as receiving the budget document, hearing the budget message, hears and considers public comment, discusses and revises the budget as needed, approves, and then approves the property taxes. Next slide. For the process, in keeping with the ORS requirement for public transparency, all meetings of the Budget Committee are open to the public. They allow public comments at 1 or more meetings. The budget becomes a public document when released to the committee. Quorum required to conduct business, hear testimony, and take action. And quorum is a majority of committee members. Next slide. More committee process. At the first meeting, you will elect a chair and a vice chair of the Budget Committee. You'll receive the budget. You will hear the budget message, explains the budget document, describes the financial policies of the city, and explains changes from prior year. You will allow public comment if this is the committee's only meeting. Next slide. More committee process continues on with reviewing the budget and make changes as appropriate. Determine taxes needed to balance. Is the entire permanent rate needed for operations? With the city of Gladstone, it definitely is. The rate or amount of operating tax to levy, the amount or rate of local option taxes needed, and the amount needed to pay bonded debt obligations for the year if we did have them. We do have debt obligations, but they're called a full faith and credit. So they are automatically built into the budget and payment is appropriated right off. Then you will approve the budget and the tax levy by motion and vote of majority. We will keep minutes, record motions, and votes taken. Next slide. Finally, you will approve the budget and the tax levy. A majority of the committee must approve the motion. The Budget Committee approves the proposed budget. Once approved, the Budget Committee's work is complete until the next budget cycle. Next slide. We will publish a summary and notice a public hearing. We will publish this notice once. And this is after the approval of the proposed budget by the committee. And staff will be preparing these needed notices and forms to formalize everything and get it approved by the governing body and also as necessary for the county and the state. We'll have a notice that will include the LB1 or UR1 forms and a narrative form of publication, time and place of hearing, and the location where the budget may be reviewed before the final hearing. Next slide. The governing body, you'll hold the budget hearing and hear testimony from any interested party, consider budget committee work and public comments, deliberate, then adjust budget estimates or proposed taxes, may increase expenditures, but if the city council does decide to adjust the budget, it will excuse me, let me back up a minute. Normally, the council will adopt the approved budget, but if for any reason they do decide, they do still have that ability to adjust the approved budget. Next slide. But if any expenditures in any fund increases by more than 10% or 5,000, whichever is greater, or if the rate or amount of tax increases by any amount, then we would have to republish the budget and hold another public hearing on it. And again, this is what helps ensure the full transparency to the public. Next slide. Finally, we will adopt, appropriate, impose, and categorize. These are the resolutions that are done by the City Council when they make full adoption of the budget. And this will be at the after the final budget hearing and before July 1. Enact the resolutions and the ordinances to adopt, to make the appropriations, impose the tax, the property tax rate, and categorize the tax. Next slide. Once the budget is adopted, then certify intent to impose taxes to your assessor by July 15th must be submitted. So we submit the tax certification forms and then the resolution statements that the council has formally adopted, and any new successful ballot measure if there was something there that substantiated why there would be a change in any types of tax rates. County clerk receives that information plus a copy of the complete budget document by September 30th. Next slide. Phase 4, any changes after adoption of the budget. Sometimes circumstances will require changes to the adopted budget. ORS has strict rules regarding the whys, whens, and methods allowed to change an adopted budget. And as it states there, no greater expenditure or encumbrance of public money shall be made for any purpose other than the amount appropriated, except, next slide. In order to change an adopted budget, specific guidelines must be followed. All changes to the budget must be approved by council. It can happen when supplemental budgets need to be taken care of, special cases that come up, and exceptions that are authorized by statute. Next slide. For example, on some of these, specific purpose grant. These are exceptions. These are actually budget exceptions. They are authorized by the council, but they do not need to go through the same level of scrutiny that supplemental budgets need. A specific purpose grant. So if we get grant fundings that we were not aware of at the time the budget was formulated, we're able to bring those in and actually appropriate to use the monies. If you have a funded unforeseen occurrence or service that's declared by the governing body, funds must be provided from an outside source, and we must adopt a resolution before spending. Next slide. We have resolution transfers between departments, and the explanation necessary within the resolution, and it must keep the budget at existing levels, no increases overall, basically just moving money from one fund or department to another. Next slide. Then we will have contingencies also. Total of transfers that are not to exceed 15% of appropriation in the fund without a supplemental budget. If you general fund to another fund, that can include resources and appropriation authority. We need a resolution though before we do the actual transfer. No resolution can transfer from any other fund without a supplemental budget. We could not go from water over to general fund without doing the supplemental. Pass-through adjustments, that's where a resolution to appropriate excess tax when known. And next slide. The supplemental budgets that are allowed, these have more requirements and may not have public hearing requirements. These are mainly utilized when there's an unforeseen circumstance that requires the increase of the total budget offset by a specific revenue source. And again, depending upon how much you are increasing the fund by will determine whether or not it must be advertised or not. These are some of the reasons that they may be allowed, but again, you must still follow those percentage requirements. Next slide. Supplemental budget restrictions do apply, reinforcing the need to anticipate the budget needs as completely as possible at the time of formulation. Next slide. Supplemental budget processes, as I was saying, the fund expenditures differ less than 10%. We can publish notice and then adopt a change within the regular governing body meeting. No public notice is necessary as far as advertisement goes. If the fund expenditures differ 10% or more, then a public notice must include the summary of the supplemental. Public notice is 5 to 30 days before hearing, and a public hearing is required. Depending upon the amount, you really have to be sure that you're following the right set of guidelines. Next slide. So basically, that sums it all up. The local budget law is confusing, but when it's broken down by steps, it supplies a complete, transparent process that ensures that we are good stewards of public funds. So thank you for your attention. We certainly appreciate it. And if you have any questions or follow-up, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Did a great job with that. I did want to let everyone know that we're required to have the document available 1 week before the meeting, and we are on target to have that on May 8th. The budget committee will receive an email and they'll have it electronically, and we will have a paper copy available for them too. So we really want to thank everybody for being engaged in the city of Gladstone. We've worked very hard to have a transparent process. And as we said before, this recording will be available to anybody to watch over again, or you can reach out to Kathy and I and ask questions. Yes. And so with that, thank you and have a good night.